I'm going to ask a lot of questions, as I'm sure my colleagues are as well, Amara. And I don't know if it's going to be a media circus, but I do know this. The first press conference is tomorrow at 1 o'clock, and it's Phil Mickelson, direct from London, where he played in that first Saudi event, that exhibition. So we will be asking him some tough questions. My sense that this will be the story of the week of the men's national championship in golf, and I promise to stay on top of it.
Yeah, I'm sure you will, and hopefully we won't hear talking points over and over. Christine Brennan, appreciate you. Thanks.
Thank you, Amar.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me. I'm Amara Walker in today for Frederica Whitfield. A potential major breakthrough on new gun legislation today. In just the past few hours, Senate negotiators announced they have struck a tentative agreement on new gun safety laws. At this point, the deal is just in principle. That's important to note. It's not yet written, but critically, it does have the support of 10 Republican senators, signaling it could be strong enough to overcome any threat of a filibuster. The new legislation comes in the wake of several mass shootings across the country, including an attack on a Texas elementary school that claimed the lives of 19 little children and 2 teachers. For the very latest now, let's bring in Daniela Diaz on Capitol Hill. Hi there, Daniela. This is quite significant. What do we know about what is in this potential new bill?
Amara, I really want to emphasize the point you just made, that this is just a framework, no legislative text yet, but important to note that there are 10 Republicans that supported this framework, signed those press releases that were sent out when that news broke a little over 2 hours ago. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's in this framework. It has proposals to support a state crisis intervention orders, investments in children and family mental health services, protections for victims of domestic violence, funding for school-based mental health and supportive services, funding for school safety resources and telehealth investments, and most notably, too, an enhanced review process for buyers under the age of 21. And there will also be penalties for straw purchasing. This announcement was signed by 10 Republicans, and it's significant considering how divided lawmakers have been over this gun issue, but also just really want to emphasize no legislative text yet. In fact, a Republican aide actually told Dana Bash, our colleague, earlier today that this was a, quote, agreement on principles. There's no legislative text, so the details will be critical for Republicans, particularly for the firearms-related provisions, for them to be able to support whatever legislation is eventually written based on this framework and get it over the finish line. But also important, the top Republican in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, praised this framework in a statement earlier. He said, quote, "I appreciate the hard work from the senators on this important issue. The principles they announced today show the value of dialogue and cooperation." So really, really notable, Amara, that the top Republican is praising this as Democrats hope that they can get enough Republican support to pass this bill once it's written. Now, they're not there yet. They're not taking any victory laps just yet. And I really believe Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, he was on our air earlier today with Dana, and he really made it clear that they're not done yet, and he's very, very optimistic. He, of course, was part of these bipartisan negotiations. Take a listen to what he said.
It's very delicate still.
That's right. There's a lot of work still to do to take this framework agreement and reduce it to legislative language. We shouldn't take a victory lap yet, but I'm so grateful for the leadership that senators like Chris Murphy and John Cornyn have shown in getting us to this point. And I'm optimistic that the pressure that we are all feeling from our constituents to act and to deliver real results will get us to the president's desk with legislation this time.
So, of course, Senator Coons referencing John Cornyn and Chris Murphy, those lead negotiators, Republican, Democrat, in these bipartisan talks. And while I do want to emphasize the scope of this framework is very, very narrow, Amara. It doesn't go as far as what some Democrats wanted, what activists wanted on gun safety legislation. The point of these talks were for Democrats to reach a consensus with Republicans so that they could get 10 Republicans on board once it goes to a vote, if it goes to a vote, so they could actually pass legislation, even if it's just incremental. They keep repeating that again and again, and we'll be hearing a lot of that in the coming days.
You got to start somewhere, right? Daniela Diaz, appreciate you. Thanks. So President Biden is at his home in Delaware today, but is already reacting to this new gun proposal and promising to sign it if it makes it to his desk. For more now, let's bring in Joe Johns, who is traveling with the president. Hi, Joe. So what is the president saying about this potential deal?
Right. You know, the takeaway from the statement that the White House released almost immediately is praise, encouragement, and perhaps some urgency in there as well. Encouragement and praise for the bipartisan group of senators who worked on this agreement, and also praise for the fact that there is a framework at this stage, even though the president made it clear in his statement that he wanted more. Here's the quote: "It does not do everything I think is needed, but it reflects important steps in the right direction." The president says this would be the most important gun legislation in decades. Certainly true. Also said there's no reason for delay. Says it should move quickly through the House of Representatives as well as the Senate. But the fact of the matter is there's a problem, and that is, as you all have already pointed out, this is just a framework. There is no legislative language, and certainly on important legislation like this that has the potential to be highly controversial, there's always the question of the devil being in the details. So they still have to put all of this together into words and pass it to the House and Senate.
Yeah, that'll be the biggest challenge, right? How things could get dicey as they start drafting the language if they get there. Joe Johns, thanks so much. So new details out of Idaho, where police say they have thwarted a potential riot. More than 30 members of the white nationalist group Patriot Front were arrested Saturday. Police say the group was traveling inside a moving truck headed toward a pride event. A local journalist saw it all happen.
It was kind of challenging, I think, for law enforcement because outside of the police line that was being formed, of course, there's this perimeter, and behind them, they're unmasking and one by one making the arrests, zip tying the individual people, loading them up. But on the other side of the police line, there were folks who were there who were participating in the Pride event. And there were also folks with firearms who were there to counter-protest the Pride event. I did see police from the police line saying, don't engage, stop that. But it was a little bit more complicated than just, separating two sides. You have people being arrested on one side of the police line, and then in front of them, groups kind of arguing with each other as well.
CNN Shimon Prokupecz tracking all of this. Shimon, you have some disturbing details because this could have been a very different situation.
Well, perhaps, yeah, and that's something certainly that law enforcement is still trying to figure out. That's why you have the FBI now as well involved in this investigation, helping the local authorities. There's still a lot of questions here. Exactly what this group was up to. It was concerning enough for a local citizen, thankfully, who saw them getting into this U-Haul, over 30 of them getting into this U-Haul, raised all kinds of concerns, and luckily that person called the police, described what they were wearing, and so then police found them and were able to take them into custody. The police yesterday describing what was going on, the atmosphere at the Pride Festival, very clearly from the police. You can tell that they were already on high alert. They were seeing some indications of possible trouble. Take a listen to that.
We did know about some of the threats that were happening online, and yes, there were people walking around the event with long guns and handguns and bear spray and all kinds of things like that. None of that's illegal in Idaho. It's only to the point when they start using it that we grow really concerned. In my opinion, I would gladly arrest 31 individuals who are coming to riot in our city for a misdemeanor rather than have them participate in some sort of seriously disruptive event, which is exactly what they were planning in downtown area.
And Amr, this is a group that is known to law enforcement and to different organizations like the Anti-Defamation League, which tracks these groups. They say this is a white supremacist group. And so this is something that certainly for law enforcement is very concerning, and certainly something they're going to keep monitoring. And hopefully in the days to come, we can get more information on exactly what they were up to.
Shimon Prokupecz, appreciate you following this. Thank you. Still to come, a busy week in the nation's capital. The January 6th committee returns for its second public hearing tomorrow. We'll tell you what's expected.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
It's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
Sodexo was created more than 50 years ago by my father, Pierre Bellon. And it's a global catering company and services company all over the world. We have fans in stadium, we have visitors in a museum, we have guests in the conference centers, and Sodexo Life is there to make memorable experiences to all these people. I think it's very important to work with people. We have to work in team spirit. This is very important to engage them. Team spirit, team of progress. I think it's very, very spirit of progress is very important. We have to every day do better than the day before. You know, this is important, and also spirit of growth. This is important too.
So many questions about what is the federal government doing. Do you get the anger that is out here?
How concerned are you about the front line?
You don't believe that there's a racial divide here?
Looking back, as president, did you tell the story of race in America enough, do you think? All the places I've been and all the things I've seen, all the people I've talked to, I carry with me. They're a part of what I do right here, holding the powerful accountable, keeping them honest.
AC 360, Tuesday through Saturday only on CNN.
Tomorrow morning, the January 6th committee returns for its second hearing. The committee's vice chair, Republican Liz Cheney, says the focus will be on former President Trump's widespread attack on the credibility of the 2020 election. On deck to testify, conservative Republican election attorney Ben Ginsburg and former Fox political editor Chris Stirewalt. Here with us to discuss, CNN legal analyst Norm Eisen and Carrie Codero. Thank you both for being here. Carrie, let's start with you. What will you be listening for in tomorrow's hearings?
I think the most important thing for the committee to do is to lay out what the factual record is and to start making the connections between the strategy and the planning that went behind the efforts to undermine and overturn the legitimate election and the planning and organization that went into the violence that occurred, the actual attack on the Capitol. And so I'll be looking in this week's hearings for the committee to start to really lay out those facts. And I think the most compelling way that the committee can do it is going to be through witnesses of people who were actually in the government, whether that is White House counsel member or the members of the Justice Department, former members of the Justice Department, but people who were on the inside who can expose what they were understanding to be taking place at the time.
And Ambassador, do you think Attorney General Merrick Garland would charge Trump if the January 6th committee, presents clear and convincing evidence that the president committed a crime? And I also want to ask you about, this, because there were several sources that told CNN that they felt that the Attorney General missed this crucial window to bring criminal charges against the former president, before he gets kind of caught up in the 2024 election, if he indeed announces that he will run.
Amara, thanks for having me back. I do believe that the evidence is mounting and very likely will result in prosecution of Donald Trump. I think we not only need to look at the federal charges, and remember, a federal judge in California has said it's likely that Trump committed at least 2 crimes with co-conspirators. We also need to look at the state charges. We know that the district attorney in Atlanta, Fani Willis, has convened a special grand jury that's moving very briskly. That's probably the first place where we're going to see charges if they're coming. I'll be looking for evidence of those charges. And Amara, no, I do not think the window has closed. We need to proceed briskly, but these hearings are very important to set the stage and get the evidence out. So the time is still there if charges are going to be brought.
Carrie, we live in a new era of information overload, hyperpartisanship. I guess the question is about how you make Americans tune in and really care about what's going on and get that message across that the threat to democracy is still alive and real.
Well, I think the January 6th committee did a compelling case of that in their first hearing. Many millions of Americans did tune in and did listen, and Chairman Thompson made a strong effort to try to explain why the historic significance of what happened is important, and why, had things gone differently on January 6th, our constitutional democracy would not exist as we know it. And so the stakes are very high. That said, Amara, there certainly are other things going on in the country. We have mass shootings. We have even the arrest that Shimon was reporting on earlier, where we have these far-right elements and violent extremist groups that are constantly threatening our communities. And so this era of political violence is something that also is relevant to these January 6th committee hearings. This was, after all, an attack on the Capitol. This was individuals who were coming to do harm to members of Congress and potentially the Vice President of the United States. So I think the committee is off to a start to try to explain to Americans why this is important, despite all the other things going on in the nation.
And Norm, I have to ask you about, the fact that there is a significant portion of the country that needs to see the evidence, to see and hear the facts of what happened on that day. But you know that they're not getting it, especially if they're watching certain channels that are not airing these hearings live, or simply just talking over it and spewing the same conspiracy theories that Trump wants to, be out there still. Does that concern you? I mean, how do you break through to that portion of the population?
Amara, you and Carrie are correct. We need to be able to do that. But I do think the hearings are breaking through. It's not just that figure of over 20 million who watched the first night. That's more than we got when I was working on the first impeachment of Trump. It's that it's touching Americans in various other ways. There was a controversy this week. It actually was in response to a tweet that I sent out. A defensive coach of the Redskins called the hearings a dust-up and compared them to racial equity protests. It resulted in coverage all over the sports pages, TMZ. So that's an example of the way Americans are confronting this question. I think it will break through.
How closely is the DOJ watching, Carrie?
I think the Justice Department, first of all, is conducting its own massive investigation. So the January 6th investigation is a nationwide investigation. We continue to see the Justice Department bring new charges, including recently they brought new seditious conspiracy charges, which are very serious charges regarding trying to prevent the business of Congress through force against members of the Proud Boys. They will certainly be, I'm sure, observing what is taking place in Congress, but it really comes down to whether at the end of this, hearings process and the end of the committee's investigation, whether the committee decides to send a criminal referral for individuals that it has covered through the course of its investigation to the Justice Department. And that's when the Justice Department would take that information in and evaluate it. But that doesn't mean that the Justice Department isn't necessarily conducting its own investigations into the activities that took place on the 6th.
And Norm, are you surprised we haven't heard from Trump himself yet, or a strong rebuttal from his inner circle?
There was an attempted counter-programming by House Republicans. It fell a little flat. We know the president was very active on his social media platform, Truth Social, including criticizing his own daughter. But, it hasn't broken through yet because the American people are tired of those falsehoods. I think there's a hunger for the truth. They're getting it from the committee. And if I were on the committee, I would be very pleased at the amount of attention things are getting. And now it's time to build the case. They're going to start with the first of those 7 steps of the conspiracy they laid out. And I think attention is only going to grow.
Norm Eisen, Carrie Cordero, thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And a quick programming note, what made John Dean decide to testify against Nixon? The Watergate scandal heating up when the CNN original series Watergate Blueprint for a Scandal continues tonight at 9 on CNN. Coming up, Senate negotiators announcing a tentative agreement on new gun control laws. Are the measures enough to address gun violence? I'll discuss it with Congressman Ted Deutsch after the break.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source. June 20th, a CNN concert event. Let's celebrate, educate, and lift every voice. Juneteenth, a global celebration for freedom. Live from the Hollywood Bowl, only on CNN.
I've personally met people around the world who told me that the first way that they found out about sex trafficking was through our documentary Nefarious. And for many people, that was the turning point that they chose to commit their life to fight this issue. My name is Helen Taylor, and I am the Vice President of Impact at the anti-human trafficking organization Exodus Cry. We are currently headquartered in Southern California. Exodus Cry began back in 2008. Our founder, Benjamin Nolo, found out about the issue of trafficking and how it was a global human rights crisis. With a background in filmmaking, he went overseas to 19 different nations and interviewed survivors, spoke with global activists and politicians. And from that series of trips, he created a documentary called Nefarious Merchant of Souls. It's been used by hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations and communities to raise awareness. It's been shown on military bases, in churches, before the UN, in the US White House, parliaments around the world. So it's really is such a testament to the power of a documentary and a story that you're able to spotlight an incredibly important and urgent global issue in a way that many people beyond your immediate reach are able to hear about.
I'm Delia Gallagher in Rome, and this is CNN.
Today marks 6 years since the horrific mass shooting at Pulse nightclub. A short time ago, people in Orlando began to honor the 49 lives that were taken. A gunman walked into the nightclub during the early morning hours of June 12, 2016. Dozens were killed and injured in what was the worst attack on the LGBT community in American history. CNN's Nadia Romero in Orlando for more on the memorials. Nadia, what are they saying?
Well, Amara, it has been such an emotional day today, with many people saying we can't forget. It's been 6 years. There have been many other mass shootings, but we have to remember what happened here 6 years ago inside of that nightclub when people came out to just enjoy themselves, to dance and have a good time. But instead, it ended in tragedy. You know, this day has been emotional. It started with all flags being flown at half-staff at the governor's request. And then at 9 a.m., a moment of silence to remember the 49 victims and the 53 others who were wounded, and the countless other members of this community and people all around the world who were impacted by what happened at Pulse nightclub. There was a woman who came who said that her son was murdered inside of this building on that night. She was inconsolable. She was weeping. She only stayed for just a little while before getting back in her car and leaving, just overcome with emotions. We spoke with another man, Antonio, who said he got all dressed up that night and he was planning on going to be here for what would have been his second time inside of the nightclub. But his husband got home from work too late, so they decided just not to go. And it was the next morning when he found out what happened and realized it could have been us. We could have been inside. We could have been killed. Listen to why he says we have to act as a community, lawmakers, as individuals to do something so that this doesn't happen again.
All I can think of is we need to do something. We need to act quick, and something must be done. Don't like to get into politics, you know, but at the same time I go like something must be done because it cannot continue to happen. It happened to us 6 years ago. It happened to children just recent, you know, with the Uvalde. So definitely, you know, something must be done because I don't want to see more life being lost to events like this.
A lot of tears, a lot of hugs, a lot of breaking down, and therapy dogs. We met one therapy dog, Amara, a golden retriever named Peace, and she was here 6 years ago comforting people, back again today to lend support. The main event, the memorial, is tonight at 7 o'clock. Amara?
Nadia Romero, thank you so much for that. And more than 11 years ago, then Congresswoman Gabby Giffords was shot in the head at a constituent event in Tucson, Arizona. 6 others were killed. Giffords' new life mission, combating gun violence, brought her back to the nation's capital this week to host a gun violence memorial. CNN's Dana Bash has more.
Parkland shooting, Uvalde, D.C., San Francisco. Too much guns. Too much guns. Too much guns.
You survived gun violence. Yes. And you're here in a sea of flowers representing people who did not survive.
I'm sad. Move ahead, do not look back. I want to make the world a better place.
The former Arizona Congresswoman leads a grassroots organization, Giffords.
Fight, fight, fight.
Dedicated to stopping gun violence, the kind that almost took her life during a constituent event in 2011. Her mission is simple.
Save lives, save lives, save lives.
I think we have made a lot of progress.
Robin Lloyd is the organization's managing director.
And that's what Gabby has really spent a lot of her time doing the past 9 or 10 years, is really trying to draw attention to the issue, use her voice where she can to enact change, and we've seen a lot of that happen.
I interviewed you in 2013, just 2 years after gun violence almost took your life. If you were to name the number one thing that Congress could do to prevent the kind of violence that you were the victim of, what would it be?
Background checks.
That hasn't happened.
No, no. The Senate, Republicans, I don't know.
divided, really tough.
But that's why we're here today. We're saying it's unacceptable that we have 45,000 Americans dead from gun violence. The Senate needs to take action. They need to do something to show the American people that they're hearing their calls for action.
I'm optimistic. It will be a long, hard haul, but I'm optimistic.
There is so much common ground on this issue when we talk to Americans of all stripes, Democrats, Republicans, gun owners, veterans. It's really only here in Washington that we see the level of divide. Out in the rest of the country, people agree that we can and should do something more, and it's not at odds with gun ownership.
Are you still a gun owner?
Yes, yes. Wild, wild west.
You still think people should have guns, just do it safely?
Yes, yes.
Activism is only part of Gifford's life today.
Yoga twice a week, French horn, Spanish lessons, riding my bike, the gym, Yo-Yo Ma.
Gabby recently performed with Yo-Yo Ma. It was a very special experience. She played the French horn.
You're living every day.
Yes, yes.
For you, being an advocate against gun violence, that's living every day.
Yes, 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 yes.
There's so much gun violence happening all the time. It's hard to wrap your head around these numbers, and that's why it's so important that we have the 40,000 white roses behind us to represent the 40,000 Americans that died from gun violence last year, and now the new 5,000 orange roses to represent the increase in just 1 year of how many gun deaths we've had in this country.
Too much guns. No more, no more, no more.
Enough is enough.
Enough is enough.
Dana Bash, CNN, Washington.
Our mission here at CNN and journalists, the news comes first. That's when your heart beats a little bit faster.
More breaking news that we are following right now.
You really work as hard as you can, getting the facts.
We're learning more about an alleged plot.
It is critically important.
To our viewers in the United States and around the world, welcome to the Situation Room. We have breaking news.
Populations of wildlife need genetic diversity to be resilient, to be able to survive. you get that resilience and you get that genetic diversity by having mixing. You know, you have mixing of jaguars from the northern part of Belize with jaguars of the southern part of Belize. And that means that wildlife need to find their way through that tiny sliver of forest. Imagine you're getting squeezed on both sides, right? Your forest cover is going. In this particular case, it's mostly due to large-scale mechanized monocrop or agriculture that's taking place. We are here at the Cox Lagoon wetland, which is actually a very critical and important part of a 30,000-acre parcel of land that we have just purchased to protect in perpetuity for the people and government of Belize. Hope is the last thing to keep you standing. You know, when there is no hope, then that's it.
On Culinary Journeys, meet Japan's Natsuko Shoji, a chef earning rave reviews. Inspired by art, she is a rising star in French cuisine and in an industry where men dominate. See how she overcame life's challenges despite the odds and is now paving the way for a new generation. Culinary Journeys, tonight on CNN, in association with Ajinomoto.
Back now to a potential major breakthrough on new gun legislation today. Senate negotiators announcing they have struck a tentative agreement. I want to bring in Congressman Ted Deutsch, a Democrat from Florida. Congressman, thanks for joining me. I know you attended one of the March for Our Lives demonstrations yesterday that took place all over the country, calling for tighter, stricter gun laws. I want to get your reaction to this framework and what the people that you spoke with at the rally would want in such a bill.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I participated in the march yesterday in Parkland with some of the families from Parkland who lost loved ones at the shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, and with a community that's been struggling for over 4 years because Congress has failed them, has been unable to do anything. And this framework that's been announced will be a step forward, assuming that we can get it done. It is just a step, but if it is a step that saves lives by subjecting gun buyers 21 and younger to enhanced background checks, and by actually expanding red flag laws and closing the boyfriend loophole to protect women, and cracking down on straw purchasers, investing in mental health and school security, these are really important steps. I commend Senator Murphy and Senator Cornyn and the Democrats and Republicans in the Senate who worked together on this. I'm not prepared to say, I haven't seen text yet, and I'm not prepared to say this is the greatest thing that we've ever seen. But the fact is, it's been 3 decades since Congress has done anything. So if we can finalize a package, the Senate should pass it, the House then will pass it, and President Biden signs it into law, then the president will have done exactly what he said, which is to bring people together to actually get something done. The last thing, those young people that marched in over 450 cities across the country, they expect a government that responds to the fact that they're tired of seeing people die in our schools and our communities. That's what this represents as a step forward.
And speaking of a response, a quick response, Senator Chris Murphy actually pointed to your state as an example of what is possible after a mass shooting after Parkland, Florida. The lawmakers there, which was a Republican-controlled legislature, they quickly passed gun restriction laws that included background checks, expanded background checks, a ban on bump stocks, to name a few. And the bill was signed by a Republican governor. What can Congress, namely the Senate, learn from that? Why is it so impossible on a federal level?
Right. Well, it shouldn't be impossible. And hopefully, from the announcement that we saw today, with the 10 or so Republican senators who have committed to this, they realize that acting in the best interest of the American people to help keep them safe is actually the right thing to do. It's not controversial. In Florida, the Republican legislature passed legislation signed by a Republican governor. By the way, then Governor Rick Scott, now Senator Rick Scott, who hopefully will be supportive of these efforts. And they realized that they could help save lives. This is what people want. That's the takeaway from Florida, that no matter where you are in the country, except until now, under the dome of the US Capitol, everybody, vast majority of people want this action taken. So if we can get this across the finish line and the president signs it into law, this represents the first significant piece of gun safety legislation in 3 decades. It's the first. And then we need to come back and we need to do more. And we need to keep going to do everything we can to keep our kids and our communities safe.
Sure, it's an incremental step, as many say. And under this framework, as you were mentioning, when it comes to buyers of guns under the age of 21, there's now this investigative period, or as you said, a more enhanced background check for those under 21. But if you look at the Buffalo shootings, the Uvalde shooting as well, both of the gunmen were 18 years old. They purchased their guns legally. We don't know that an enhanced background check would have flagged anything, right? So why not just raise the minimum age for purchasing a semi-automatic rifle from 18 to 21, the age when you can start drinking alcohol legally?
Yeah, I obviously don't think that that's controversial. You don't think it's controversial. And I would venture to guess that virtually everyone watching us right now would say that that's not controversial. That said, I don't want to stand in the way of doing something that can help save lives. What we hear all the time, whenever we introduce legislation after another mass shooting, another effort to try to make our community safe, what we're told is, well, that wouldn't have stopped this one, or it wouldn't have stopped that one. There is a lot that we know we should do, but if we can come up with a package that will save some lives, then by all means, we ought to do it. And we ought to be grateful that Congress can come together to do it and keep moving forward. Look, I sponsor the legislation to outlaw high-capacity magazines because no one needs to be able to fire off 20 or 30 or 100 rounds at a time. And most people agree with me in that sentiment. But if we can't get that now, let's do what we can. Let's stand up and do what's right, and let's keep pushing forward. That's how we're going to save more and more lives.
For those who do not pay attention to the way Congress works on a daily level, we heard the word delicate. This is a delicate process. There is a framework. In theory, there is an agreement, but the devil's in the details, as they say in the text. How delicate is the situation, in your opinion?
Right. Well, until the president signs this into law, it's really delicate because we've seen what's happened in the past. But the fact that there's a majority in the Senate of more than 60 that says that they've signed off to this package, now we need to see the final language. We need to make sure that it's going to do what everyone thinks it's going to do, what the agreement was. And then the Senate needs to move forward, and then the House needs to move forward. And my hope is that we can come up with final language in a bill that will accomplish what we're trying to, that the House will then take up in a bipartisan way and pass as well, and that the president can quickly sign into law. The sooner we get this done, the better it will be for our communities, for our kids, and for our country. And so I'm looking forward to reviewing language, hopefully as soon as tomorrow, and hopefully the Senate will be able to move and we can get this all done over the next week to 10 days. I think that has to be the goal. There is momentum now because people are repulsed by the number of shootings that they've seen as it continues to increase. We have to capitalize on the fact that everyone wants action. Now is that time to act.
I think everyone agrees we need to end this never-ending cycle of mass shootings in America.
Absolutely right.
Congressman Ted Deutsch, really appreciate you carving out some time for us. Thank you.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Air Quality Update in association with Copernicus, Europe's Eyes on Earth. Air Quality Update, in association with Copernicus, Europe's Eyes on Earth.
We share this place, we all belong.
I'm Andrea Vena. I'm the Chief Climate and Sustainability Officer at the European Space Agency. The great responsibility that ESA has to be responsible is linked very much to the fact that since decades our programs are contributing to the understanding of climate change. Our satellites are contributing to the climate variables that are used by scholars and scientists all over the world to identify what are the hotspots for climate change. Therefore, we feel accountable. We know what is the situation, and therefore it is very much important for ESA to be on the leading edge for fighting against climate change.
We've missed the globe-trotting and adventures, and we're longing to get out and go.
This is living.
Uncovering the city's DNA.
Look at that.
Meeting people who will share its secrets.
It's going to be very cold.
And making discoveries that wow.
We're not doing that again.
It's a world of wonder.
Gorgeous.
Now, go and see it. Saturday on CNN, in association with Turkish Airlines.
On the next Living Golf, discover the history of the sport in Sweden. How do they keep producing some of the world's best golfers? Hear from rising stars.
I think it's just more fun when a Swede wins.
Then visit the region's flagship event, the Scandinavian Mixed, and sit down with Europe's next Ryder Cup captain, Henrik Stenson.
This is where it all started for me.
Living Golf, Saturday on CNN, in association with Gulf Saudi.
You can help the refugees from Ukraine. Join the over 80,000 who've already raised millions for food, shelter, and more. Explore cnn.com/impact. Click to take action.
I'm Larry Medowo in Kigali, Rwanda, and this is CNN.
How do you like me now? How do you like me now? Now that I'm on my way, you still think I'm crazy, standing here today.
Some sad news into CNN. Country music superstar Toby Keith has announced on Twitter that he has stomach cancer. He says he spent the last 6 months receiving chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery. The 60-year-old singer added he needs time to breathe, recover, and relax, and hopes to see his fans soon. All the best to him. Well, the January 6th committee hearings have begun, and one of the things they're investigating is the role of Alex Jones. Jones is one of the most prolific spreaders of disinformation in the U.S., repeatedly urging his followers to go to D.C. to fight in the lead up to the insurrection. CNN senior investigative correspondent Drew Griffin spent months looking into Jones. Here's a preview of the special report.
As federal agents zeroed in on January 6th, Alex Jones' influence was on display.
You want to fight? You better believe you got one!
His own employees face criminal charges from an InfoWars editor who streamed the riot.
It feels good to be an example, man!
to InfoWars host Owen Schroyer, who was right by Jones' side.
1776! 1776!
At least 20 of those arrested either worked under Alex Jones, appeared on his show, or followed his content. The mother of one rioter told a judge her son believes everything Alex Jones has to say. Another rioter, who allegedly tased a police officer, told FBI agents Alex Jones inspired his journey.
How did you start going to these rallies? InfoWars.
Two men linked to Jones face the most serious charges filed in the January 6th riot: seditious conspiracy. Oath Keeper founder Stuart Rhodes, a frequent InfoWars guest whose phone contained an encrypted chat that included Jones. Rhodes pleaded not guilty. And former InfoWars reporter and Proud Boys leader Joe Biggs, who pushed his way through the police lines into the Capitol. He also pleaded not guilty.
Biggs, what you gotta say? It's bullshit!
Jones has not been charged. But CNN has learned the January 6th Select Committee investigators want to know about Jones' involvement in the funding for Trump's rally, the planning for his march to the Capitol, and Jones' ties to extremists now charged with conspiring against the government.
I said this, my lawyer told me almost 100 times today during the interrogation. On advice of counsel, I am asserting my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent.
Jones says he refused to answer the committee's questions about January 6th, but told his InfoWars audience he knew nothing about a plot.
And they already know I didn't do anything. I wasn't planning any violence. I was even talking about everybody should be peaceful.
He would say he was talking about a peaceful type of fight, but that's not how it's actually translated to the people that follow Alex Jones.
Joining me now is CNN senior investigative reporter Drew Griffin. Drew, a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for being here. What's frightening just listening to that excerpt is the influence and really power that Alex Jones has over so many people's minds. As you were doing this report, anything that stood out to you?
I think that is what stood out. We, meaning most people from the outside looking in, look at Alex Jones as a bit of a clown. He's not a clown to his followers. He preaches this stuff. He's the reason that so many people in this country automatically believe when there's a school shooting that it was government run. He's the foundation of a lot of these crazy conspiracy theories that are spewed on right-wing news channels or other outlets. They are sourced and go back to Alex Jones's head. He makes this stuff up, and he mostly makes it up just to keep, it's part of his business model, to keep these people hooked, buying his products, and building this network, which is all